A number of years ago, I was a pastor in Baltimore, Maryland. And one of the big events that took place during that time, my son was born. But another event that I came across a story that was published about that time. And I want to read it to you. It says, if you were ever lucky enough to visit Christmas Island off the coast of Maine, the natives will point to you with quiet pride and deep affection, the home of Joseph and Mary Carpenter. It is a tight, compact, freshly painted little white house set in the very center of the village. You would have no way of knowing this, but every beam and rafter, every floorboard and stair tread has been laid carefully by the islanders themselves in recognition of their miracle. The miracle which 3 years ago gave Gull Island the new name Christmas Island. In the neat white house, 32-year-old Joseph Carpenter and his wife Mary and their 3-year-old son live happily, at peace with each other and with the world. One large front room is a sort of a Yankee trading shop, which the villagers do a land office business, swapping everything from boats to baked goods. The islanders pay the carpenters for the space as well as running the shop. And even though Joseph is a victim of Parkinson's disease, he is independent and self-supporting. You'd never guess, watching the villagers bustling in and out day after day, that there'd been a time not too long ago when every resident on that island wanted the Carpenters evicted and sent away. Not from this house, mind you. They were living in the lighthouse. And that is where the story really begins. For this is the story of the lighthouse on Gull Island, the lighthouse which gave Gull Island the new name Christmas Island. Amen. On that never-to-be-forgotten 25th morning of December in the year of 1959. Amen. To begin with, Joseph and Mary Carpenter bought the lighthouse, stock, lock, and barrel, for $465. It was hopelessly run down. A derelict tower rising sharply out of the ocean, unpainted, weather-whipped, and with a narrow, rough ribbon of water separating it from Gull Island. But to the Carpenters, it was not the tower. It was paid for. It was home. And that's all that really mattered. By trade, Joseph had been an automobile mechanic, a good one, in his own little shop in Portland, Maine. It had been a great shock to him to learn that September that he had Parkinson's disease, which would be progressive, chronic, and incurable. With their first child expected in December, they didn't know what to do. For Joseph's limbs were already getting stiff. There was a noticeable rigidity in his movements. and he would no longer be able to work in his shop because of the tremor in his right arm and hand. Joseph would probably live long, no doubt, but if he couldn't work, how could he possibly plan a future for his young wife Mary and their child soon to be born? Carefully, he checked his savings, sold his shop, and almost as if for a godsend, he heard about Gull Island Lighthouse. He was able to buy the lighthouse, which had come into possession of a Portland merchant. For the carpenters, it was an answer to prayer. In a small place like Gull Island, the cost of living would be much less. The pace would be slower. He might even find some way to supplement their savings. Then Joseph could be out in the fresh air and sunshine much of the year. So on the 10th of November in the year 1959, Joseph and Mary came to its ivory tower. But if they had guessed how violently the people in the village would react to what they termed outsiders coming in, they might have hesitated. But they had no way of knowing how proud and high-bound, how steeped in tradition the islanders were, each loved in his own little hole. They did not know, and so they paid the $460 and came to what, because of the miracle, of course, Gull Island Lighthouse. It was snowing when they first saw it, and one of those late fall, early winter snows that tossed silver slivers of ice across the caps of the waves. Their troubles began when they reached the dock. First, there was no boat to carry them across the small strip of water from the island to the lighthouse. And finally, Joseph, in desperation, paid $50 for an old flat-bottomed scull not worth $10. Supplies were next, and here too they were met with disgusting resentment from the villagers. When Mary protested that the prices on the shelves were much lower than the prices they were asked to pay, the keeper grunted, "Ah, not to outsiders." From the very beginning, everything went the same way. It was clear that Gull Island wanted no part of squatters in their lighthouse, and the sooner Joseph and Mary Carpenter headed back to Maine, the better it would be for all concerned. Joseph would have gone, but for some reason Mary would not leave. She would not leave after she found the lighthouse, in the lighthouse storeroom, the old driftwood cradle that was shaped like a manger. "Don't ask me to leave now, Joseph," Mary pleaded. "I can't explain why. I don't know why. I only know our baby has to be born here. Later, if you wish to go, I'll go. Oh, indeed, I'll gladly go, but not yet, not quite yet." So the carpenter stayed. November lengthened into December. Joseph's disease, aggravated by the conditions around him, grew worse. His arms trembled more. It became harder and harder for him to make the trip to the village for supplies and kerosene, especially the kerosene, for it was heavy and awkward to handle, and he could bring only a little at a time. They needed it desperately, though, for the hot mortar that gave them heat, and for the lamps that were the only source of light, for the old stove on which Mary cooked their meals. There was regular oil delivered to every house in the village, but not to the carpenters. And it seemed to Joseph, if the villagers were watching for him to haul the 5-gallon cans, just waiting for the day when he could no longer manage them at all, as if they were saying, when the kerosene is gone, they'll have to leave. The disease would take many years to break Joseph's body, but what the islanders did to his spirit in 6 short weeks had a terrifying thing. And what the experience did to his own soul was worse. For Joseph began to hate. He hated the place. He hated the people, and even God himself. Until that Christmas morning. There's no doubt doctor on the island, and because Mary would not leave the lighthouse and none of the women would help, only Joseph was with her that Christmas morning when a fine, strong, handsome man-child was born at midnight on Christmas Eve. Only Joseph was with her to wonderingly pick up his son in his arms and to stand straight and tall, not trembling now, and looking across the sea to the land where he had been refused room and kindness. And then a strange thing happened to Joseph. He tried to put it into words, but there was no words. He only knew that he held the baby in his arms. A great joy suddenly welled up within him, and he wanted to share this supreme moment of his happiness to the world. At that instant, there was no longer any fear of the disease, any hatred for the neighbors, because suddenly there was no room inside him for either of these things. He turned from the bed, still holding the baby's warm and close against his chest. He knew, as he looked across the swift strip of sea to the land beyond, that nothing mattered anymore. All the malice, all the frustration, all the bitterness was gone. Here in his arms is only hope, eternal hope. Gently, Joseph gave the baby back to his wife, Mary, and watched as she laid him in the driftwood cradle. And then, because he wanted to share this moment with the people of Gull Island, he wanted to shout out to them, "Behold my son, may he be a credit to your village." Because he wanted to say, I'm not angry anymore, I'm not hurt anymore, I'm not afraid. I want to share this happy moment with you. He took from his precious oil and kerosene enough to fuel the 5 huge lamps in the lighthouse window. He filled them and set them blazing like large candles in the dark, and the 5 beams spread out in 5 separate directions, like the point of a giant star. Some of the islanders saw the light. A few of them even thought it might be a distress signal, but they couldn't have cared less. Until 6 o'clock the next morning, on Christmas morning, before they had really found out, at 6 o'clock the next morning, when the radio commentator first began to flash across the nation the story of the miracle. How could the villagers have guessed that exactly at midnight, Christmas Eve, Mary Carpenter had given birth to her firstborn son and laid him in a driftwood cradle shaped like a manger. How could she have possibly known that at 10 minutes past 12 o'clock midnight, just as Joseph lit the lamps in the lighthouse to proclaim to the world that his son had been born, that the pilot of a giant airliner lost in the fog off the coast with his plane's communication system jammed, suddenly had seen the heavens open and around him large 5-pointed beacon lights shine through. The pilot tried to explain later in reporters in Portland, Maine the next morning exactly what had happened. But like Joseph, he couldn't put it into words. All he could tell was, as the sky broke into light around him, he saw in one horrified instant that his plane was headed directly toward the little village where the people lived on the lighthouse, to crash land and kill many people. But when he saw the light from the lighthouse, he was able to veer his craft back into the upper channels of air and go out to sea. And then with the beacon to guide him from the lighthouse, and like a wise man led by a star, this pilot led his 88 passengers to a 3-point landing in Portland, Maine, leaving Christmas Island quietly, safely asleep under the Christmas star. And now you know why the people of Gull Island changed the name from Gull Island to Christmas Island. Now you know why the islanders built the house for Joseph and Mary. You know too why Christmas Island seems so different from much of the rest of the world. The reason is that a spirit pervades that island, a spirit of love, understanding, and tolerance that is rare, genuine, and wonderful. It is a spirit that can never die of itself. It is part of the miracle of Christmas, which began, after all, with the birth of a baby and a star of forgiveness that the Father in heaven lit to save the world.